When I get older, I'm gonna have like 25 kids. Oh, yeah. And we got to name them too.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming out on a cold night. And it's been a minute. What have we been, 4 weeks since we had a study? Something like that? So it's time. It's
Might
time.
have to reintroduce yourself.
I know. I'm Pastor Aaron. Nice to meet you. Yeah, you saw me Sunday. All right, so Ecclesiastes. Well, before we start, someone pray for us.
I will.
Thanks, Bill.
Dear Lord, it is so good to be here together. The warmth of our friendship and our fellowship help to ward off the cold of this night and of this world. Bless this new study and guide Pastor Aaron as he teaches us about Ecclesiastes. We pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. All right, who knows anything about Ecclesiastes?
Solomon wrote it?
Solomon wrote it, yes. So for authorship, the most probable and traditional view is this is written by Solomon. We don't know for sure because it's not named. Kind of the clue is in verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. The question would be, does that mean literal son or son in the sense of someone further down the line? So there's some theories of a later king, but it seems the context fits pretty well to be Solomon, based on some things we'll take note of as we read through. What else do we know about Ecclesiastes? Barry? Isn't this Bible study just meaningless? First 2 chapters will be, Hevel, yep.
It made great lyrics for a song
Yes.
in the 70s.
Church,
Yeah, the birds. Yeah, that's it.
So meaninglessness and vanity will be a big theme in here about what has value and many things that don't have value. So there's definitely a somber tone in much of this book. And we'll have to power through the first couple chapters because it's worse at the front. What else do we know? All right, that's it. That sounds about right, actually. All right. Okay, so author is likely Solomon. What age would Solomon have been when he wrote this? Young or old? Old. Yeah, this is older Solomon. The kind of traditional view is Solomon wrote 3 books. He wrote Song of Solomon or Song of Songs when he was young. He wrote Proverbs in his middle age, and he wrote Ecclesiastes in his old age. The view of when this book was written is right around the end of Solomon's reign, around 931 BC. We don't know exactly where, but somewhere towards the very tail end of his life. Historic context. This is in the time of the kings. So Israel, basic history, Israel was in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. They are delivered by God. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years with Moses as their leader. Then they get into the promised land, and this is what we call the time of the judges. Joshua is the first of those judges, and they are kind of informal military leaders who guide them. Give me some other examples of judges that you guys remember. Samson's one, yep. Gideon. Deborah. Who else? Joel is one of them, I think. Yeah, anyway. And some of these judges are good. And yeah, Samuel would be the last judge. Some of these judges are good, some of them not so much. They're in this period. And finally, Israel is kind of groaning for a king. They're begging God to give them a king so they can be like the rest of the nations. And God kind of says, no, you don't really want that. But they insist, and he tells Samuel, the last judge, anoint one. The first king is Saul. He reigns for about 30 years. Then the second king is David. This is kind of the peak for Israel. Well, you could argue this is kind of the peak in power. Solomon, his son, is probably the peak in splendor and affluence. you could say. And then Solomon has Rehoboam take the kingdom from him. And during this reign, the kingdom is split into two. Okay, so there's only 3 kings who rule over the whole of Israel. And after that, it becomes a northern and southern kingdom. Much due to Rehoboam's political failures, but some of it starts with Solomon, if we're being honest. After that, there's a period of kings, some good, some bad. The northern kingdom is eventually conquered. The southern kingdom persists a little longer. Who remembers this? Who conquers the northern kingdom?
The Assyrians.
Assyrians, yep. The southern kingdom, Judah, exists a little longer. Who takes them? Babylon. Yep, and they get carried off into exile for 70 years. Then the Persians come in and take power from the Babylonians, and the Persian king Cyrus lets them go back home. And that's where you get into Ezra and Nehemiah and Haggai, where they start rebuilding Jerusalem. Eventually they do rebuild the temple. Solomon's the one who builds the temple. So up until Solomon, they've got what to worship in? The tent, the tabernacle. David really wants to build the Lord a house, a temple. And God keeps telling him, no, not yet, not yet. And he finally promises him his son will get to it. And so Solomon builds the first temple, which is destroyed by the Babylonians. Later, it gets rebuilt after they come back from Babylonian exile. And then that's the period where you have a few more prophets, and then you get the silent years, and then you get Jesus. Any questions on kind of the historic context of where we are? We're at the tail end of Solomon's reign. Any questions on that? I know we went through 2,000 years of history pretty fast. Okay. Yes, we should start having a quiz at the end.
No, we shouldn't.
Give you guys a little grade school, high school trauma again. Yeah. So what's going on in the life of Solomon at this point? Who remembers things about Solomon? Because we'll get into a little bit about him, but if you really want to know his story, read Kings and Chronicles. And it kind of tells of his kingdom and some of the flaws and some of the beauty. But what do we know about Solomon? Because I think it informs how we read this book. Barry.
Solomon was the judge of the king that asked for wisdom. The guy gives him wisdom, but then it kind of goes to his head, and he's got this flaw where he likes foreign women, and God told him that's how that's around.
Yep. So one on a positive side, God, when he's young, says, I'll give you one thing. And Solomon asks for wisdom, and God gives it to him. There's some of the stories where Solomon makes really wise choices, and he has access to an almost unhuman amount of wisdom, but does he always use it? And the answer is, as he gets older, no. He gets a little too involved in two things, earthly riches and women. And one of the ways he seeks to be political is he makes all these marriage alliances with all the other kings around, and he does what is not good in the Lord's eyes, and he marries all these foreign princesses, and eventually he starts to be persuaded by them to worship some of their gods. And this is where Solomon really strays, and it causes problems with his sons, and it causes problems in his kingdom. And you get here towards the end of his life, and Solomon has a pretty powerful kingdom. He's very wealthy, but he is seeing some of the vanity and all of that, and the brokenness in the life he's led. And so you kind of get a kind of come to Jesus moment for Solomon in his final work of Ecclesiastes. Questions on that? Okay. One of the things he's looking at is he's seeing that this great pinnacle of Israel's success under David and somewhat under him is about to fall apart. There's kind of this sense in Ecclesiastes that we're at the peak and it's all downhill from here, which was accurate. They never would reach again this kind of prominence in the regional or historical context. Any questions there? Okay. What type of biblical literature is Ecclesiastes? Yeah. Wisdom literature. What are examples of other books that would be considered wisdom literature? Proverbs is one. What else? Psalms would be considered wisdom literature. Song of Solomon would be considered wisdom literature. And then Job. Okay. It's kind of. Sometimes, yeah. Yeah. Okay. And they're just a little different. Not all of those are written in a sense where they're not so much written to a specific people, warning them like a prophet would. They're not necessarily written to chronicle history like many of the history books would, but they're written to a more timeless audience in a sense of this is what is good. This is the way man should operate. Okay. Who's the audience of Ecclesiastes? I'll give you a hint there.
More timeless audience.
Mm-hmm. The way I'd put it is it's a public address to the wise. All right, so a address, it's to the people of Israel, but more than that, it's an address to the future leaders of Israel. It's an address to those who would seek wisdom. Ben's off and running. Purpose. What would we guess at a purpose for Ecclesiastes?
It's a warning somewhat.
Yeah, certainly. There's warning in this. A warning for the people of Israel not to fall into, in a lot of ways, the pitfalls the author fell into. Yeah.
I think there's a message of hope
Mm-hmm.
that, well, we can't do anything now, there will come a time.
Okay. Yeah. You'll notice there's probably more law than gospel in the book of Ecclesiastes, but the message of hope is in there. That there is something we're looking towards. Okay.
Is it a reflection of Solomon on his life? Like you say, a come to Jesus meeting, if you will, that he
Yeah.
begins writing down,
Sure.
his foibles and his folly.
Yeah. If I was going to sum it up like a one-sentence purpose statement, it would be to confront mankind on the dangers of idolatry. Okay, so to confront mankind on the places they look for meaning and purpose apart from God. And here's where the hope is, that if you want your life to have a sense of meaning and purpose, and for you not to look back at the end and say this was all in vain, God must be an integral part of all these things you seek out. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, there's a lot of writing these days about how to declutter. And it's sort of a decluttering book.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sifting through what is valuable and what is not. And even among the valuable things, what makes them valuable. There's lots of good that Solomon did, and we can see it in the 3 pieces of the Bible he left for us. But even in the midst of those, he was doing a lot of things for the wrong reason. And so, why are these things valuable? Any other thoughts on purpose? Here's another one that we'll see tucked away there, and we'll come back to this. But it's not living life with expectations out in front. One of the themes in Ecclesiastes, is that when we have this mindset of life's going to go this way, often it disappoints. And there's kind of this mindset of adopting a posture of trust in God's way and soaking up the little things, the little pieces of grace as he takes you on a path that is where he's going to go with you anyway. Okay, so kind of adopting a posture of trust rather than a posture of life must go to my expectations. And there's kind of this sense of it won't. Okay. Themes. Or do you have a question?
Just a comment. This reminds me today of what we would call an opinion piece. Somebody writes like an editorial or something in a magazine or something, and it's just an opinion about the state of the situation. And that's what it's kind of reminding me. He's just stating the way he sees things as to illuminate people for just what you just said.
Sure.
Not chasing after the things of the world, not going to
Yeah, it certainly comes off in the narrative or the literary sense in the same kind of style as that. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of his testimony in a lot of ways. These are the mistakes I've made. Don't follow suit. He doesn't write it quite as personally as that, but knowing it's Solomon, you can see it that way. Okay. Themes within Ecclesiastes that we know of. Oh, I forgot one of my purposes. To rescue people from lives of emptiness. Okay, so one is on the law side to confront people on their idolatry. But why does God really care about us not having idols? And it's to rescue us from lives of idolatry or lives of emptiness. Okay. Themes. Anyone got one?
Time for everything.
Yep.
Sing it, Mary. That's catchy.
So you'll catch two readings in here that will probably be the most familiar to you. And one is read at weddings and one is read at funerals.
Oh.
Okay? What's the one read at weddings? You guys remember? You guys will know it when I say it. Yeah, there's a text in here that's often read at weddings and a text in here that's often read at funerals. What's the one read at weddings? I think I just heard someone
Times
say
of
it.
grace and the
Yeah, the threefold cord. Yep. Oh yeah, you were just at a wedding where that happened, right? Yeah. Yeah. So in chapter 4, where God says a threefold cord is not easily broken, and we often use that. It's at first saying two are better than one, and then a threefold cord, and we interpret that to be understood as man and wife, and then a marriage with God in the middle is the threefold cord. Okay. What about the funeral text? Yeah. There's a time for everything under the sun. A time to live and a time to die, a time to sow and a time to bury. Yep. And part of this is within the greater context of the message, but also there's a lot of wisdom tucked in here like there is in Proverbs. Okay. So themes, the roller coaster of life could be a theme. Ken?
Related to what you said was one of the purposes, that there is a lack of meaning in life and purpose without God.
Mm-hmm. Are you adding to that, or?
No.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, yes. That apart from God, life is empty. And I think people sometimes find that out too late. And I think Solomon is lamenting that same fact in his life, that I did too much of my life without God, and I look back on it and it's empty. It's empty. Other themes.
Pastor, what about, the one I think of most common is the pursuit of earthly gain, for lack of a better word, whether it's pleasures or
Yeah.
wealth or whatever, it's I'm not gonna see.
Sure.
It's just, it doesn't produce the full life. It's not-
Yes, yeah. The vanity and earthly pleasures. Yep. Another theme would be foolishness hastens destruction. This is a theme in Proverbs, certainly, but it's another one in Ecclesiastes. A big theme you'll notice is death. Solomon is near his death, and kind of the way it's framed in Ecclesiastes is death is the great equalizer. Rich or poor, success or not, you're going to die. And look back from the deathbed and what was of value in your life. And kind of his point is at that time, the things you probably spent a lot of time valuing aren't going to be the things you really care about. And so death is a theme, and you can't really read a book like this without understanding it in the context of death. And I think this is an important point for us as Christians, to live lives with death in the picture. Because most often humans get off track because they forget about death, or we try to ignore that it's going to happen. And this is why people generally get wiser as they get older, because they're confronted by death, right? You're confronted with mortality, and you start thinking about things a little more clearly. And it's the job of Christians to always keep that in frame. That there is this great big problem we all have, and it's death, and it's sin attached to that, and it's brokenness attached to that. And how do we live lives that have meaning and hope, even knowing, yeah, I'm going to die, and my body's breaking down. And so there's the sense of not running from that, but embracing that and allowing yourself to live a more full, meaningful life because you know that's coming. There's a movement within the Lutheran Church called, what's it called? Natural burial, I think. And the idea is that you bury your family like you would have like 500 years ago. So the family actually washes the body, and the family gathers around and puts them and you do it much faster. And the idea behind this is so that death isn't so sanitized. You know, the way we live our lives is, you know, you die and immediately the funeral home comes in and they take the body, and then they do what? They try and make the person look as much like as when they were alive as possible. And the family never deals with any of the mess or the smell or the brokenness of death. And so the idea behind this is, you know, maybe my 10-year-old kid should be introduced to death a little earlier, rather than us being allowed to forget that it's coming until we actually see our own bodies breaking down, which is generally what happens. And now I'm not saying this is what you must do. I don't think I would go that far personally. But you get what they're after, is not allowing our technology and our money to sanitize this simple truth that will happen to all of us. Questions there?
Just
Bill.
an observation, I just finished reading a novella by Leo Tolstoy, and I would highly recommend it, called, you haven't read it, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and it's about a man who is dying, and it talks about him going through that process of dying. And then it wasn't on purpose, but I also picked up a book, and I'm about a third of the way through, by William Faulkner, called As I Lay Dying, and it's about a woman in Mississippi who dies, and the family has agreed to take her body and bury it where she grew up.
Okay.
Yeah, and so both of these are books that really get into the nitty-gritty of death, and it's interesting. It's just I just happened to see something about reading these, and I highly recommend them both. And it may tie in nicely with this.
Sure. And now, there's a balance here, right? I'm not encouraging anyone to become obsessed with death. But let us not forget that this is a reality. Ken?
On this particular subject, it reminded me of a time that I attended the funeral of a Jewish friend, a close friend. And after the prayers and the body was put into the ground, we were all asked to take the shovel and put dirt into the ground.
Yeah.
We were all part of the burial.
Yeah, be included in the process. Yeah.
Emotional,
Yeah,
to say the least.
absolutely. Nate?
So, as this was being written, death was a finality in their world. Ours, it isn't.
You talking resurrection?
Talking heaven.
Yeah. I believe that the Old Testament people of God did believe in resurrection after life. They didn't have as clear of a picture, but that there was always a teaching of resurrection. Yeah. Now, whether they're paying attention or not would kind of clue them in on that.
But that doesn't mean that we have to fear death or dread death.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So there's hope of resurrection, which is part of it. But death puts in perspective that I'm here for a finite time, and I can only do so much with that. And when we forget about it, we tend to not use our time as well as we can, and be a little more frivolous, a little more vain, a little more pursuing things that assume I'll live forever, if that makes sense. You know, we all intellectually know we're going to die, but we don't necessarily make decisions based on that aspect, if that makes sense. So, Barry.
Can you prepare some biblical references to what you just said about the Old Testament, that they believed in resurrection? Because that's something that
Yeah.
I've wondered about myself, and I was never able to find anything.
Yeah. I'll do that because as I was saying it, I was like, we need that's an excursus topic, so, yeah.
I guess it's related to that. Wasn't there a sect, the Pharisees did believe in the Sadducees?
Yes, the Pharisees believed in a resurrection and the Sadducees did not.
Okay,
And the way I always look at Sadducees is they were kind of the liberal Jews. They didn't really believe in, I don't think they believed in angels as being a real thing. I don't think they believed in the resurrection. So they were kind of the cultural Christians who said, yeah, I like that and I like that, but this stuff doesn't really make sense with my naturalistic, logical brain, so I'm gonna put that away. And so the Pharisees were a little bit more fundamentalist, and obviously they got into trouble with that in some ways, but they were the more faithful of the two. And so, but that's a good point, is that obviously these Jews in Jesus' day, a big portion of them believed in resurrection. So where are they getting that is the topic for the excursus, yeah.
And not to belabor this too much, but since you mentioned the Old Testament, it wasn't, I don't think there's any reference in the first 5 books, but in Daniel 12, verse 2, and in Isaiah 26:19 are both referred, and even sometimes throughout the Psalms, there's talk about awakening after death.
Yep. Yeah, it's in there. It's not as clear, but they had come to a pretty robust theology of the resurrection.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Other questions here? Okay. Where were we?
What does the Ecclesiastes mean?
That's where we are. Thank you. All right, so who knows what Ecclesiastes means? Anyone? All right, so the Hebrew word is koheleth. Make sure I spell this right. Okay? That's the Hebrew word of the title of this book. Later, the Greek word is what we have today, Ecclesiastes. The Hebrew word translates the words of the preacher or the words of the teacher. Okay? And Ecclesiastes, and some of this is just ease of translation, Ecclesiastes translates to preacher. The better way to understand this is the words of the preacher. Or, in a more literal sense, the words of the one who gathers the people. Okay, so that's kind of how we're looking at this. This is people being gathered to hear the words of this one teaching them. It's not, probably don't think a preacher in the sense that we all have the contemporary context, but the words of the one who gathers them to impart something. Okay, and it's named after this first line here, the words of the preacher, which would be koheleth in Hebrew. Okay. Questions on that? Barry.
The Greek word ecclesia, doesn't that normally refer to the church?
Yeah, ecclesia does. So,
Is this a form of that word?
yes. Yeah, they're very closely related. So ecclesia means gathering, and Ecclesiastes is kind of the one who speaks to the gathering. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So if you've ever seen like Christian groups named ecclesia, that's kind of the Greek word for church or gathering in the New Testament. Okay, last question. What is the relationship between Ecclesiastes and Proverbs? I'm sure you're probably a little more familiar with Proverbs. Remember, Proverbs is written earlier in Solomon's life. And what is Proverbs functionally? It's a book of wisdom. Okay, wisdom versus folly. We'll come back to that.
Do's and don'ts?
Yeah, it's kind of do's and don'ts. And it's not, if you read Proverbs, it's not like even a single chapter is like a coherent following of itself. It's one little snippet of wisdom, a proverb, after another. And, 2 or 3 might be connected, but you read a whole chapter and you could talk about, I've always thought about doing Proverbs in here, but we could talk for hours. Because every chapter is like 16 topics we could run off on. And maybe we will at some point. But, and it's good wisdom. It's godly wisdom. But then you get to Ecclesiastes, and one of the things Solomon's going to point out in Ecclesiastes is the vanity of wisdom. The vanity of wisdom. And what he's saying is that in some ways, even wisdom is useless. After he wrote Proverbs, and he had all this wisdom that was accessible to him. So what's the relationship?
That even wisdom can bring you down or can take you down if you think too highly of yourself, of the wisdom that you have. I got it all. I've got the wisdom.
Yeah.
I don't need God.
That's really close to what I'm going to say.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me say it this way.
Okay.
Wisdom is not enough. You could follow every proverb to a T, and you probably have a pretty decent life. You probably save a lot of money. You'd probably raise a decent family. You'd probably have friends, and people would trust you. But you'd get to the end of your life. You'd get to this point of death, this big theme, and you'd still be without hope. And you'd still be looking back and saying, what's this financial nest egg I've built worth? What is this family that is all doing well health-wise and have homes? What is it worth? And the connection is the wisdom's good. The Proverbs are good, but separated from God, it's still vanity. It's still a wisp in the wind. It's something I'm chasing after that has no meaning. And this is kind of the relationship. Solomon at the end of his life realizes the wisdom only is worth it in the context of a relationship with my Creator. And now that we know our Savior, it's extended to a relationship with your Savior. Questions? Barry?
Can you connect that and say, like what Paul said in the New Testament, that, the law shows us sin, so you can try and follow the law, but it's never the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The law is good, and more than likely you're going to have a better life if you follow the law, if you follow the wisdom of God. But at the end of the day, death and sin and brokenness are still present, and ultimately you're still going to die, and sin might still have its way with your life, and you can follow everything perfectly, and it's not enough to have hope and meaning apart from the gospel. Which is the relationship with God that's engineered not by our doing, but by His. So yeah, absolutely, there's a great application there. Any other thoughts or questions there? So this is kind of the context that we're going to read this with. Solomon saying the wisdom's good. He wrote about his wife in Song of Solomon. The marriage is good, but these beautiful things, even when done well, if you don't keep them in the right priority and you don't keep God in view, you look back and you say, what was this all worth? Any final questions before we start reading this? All right, someone read for us the first 11 verses here. All is vanity.
The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after.
All right, thank you, Kim. What do we notice? What's that? Around and around, yep. Yeah, there's this cyclical nature, and there is some wisdom here for us that the problems we're dealing with are not new. The temptations we're dealing with are not new. And also the things that give us joy are not new. You might say my smartphone's new, but the things that draws in me, the things I might find addictive about that or find joyful about that, they're the same. You know, the connection it provides, that's good. Same thing that sparks joy. The things in there that might be a little more accessible, but yet are still problematic for my soul, they're the same. Nothing new. What else do we notice?
It's like it's mysteries of the universe, of the world, that people will never understand.
Yeah, there is a sense of,
Like where the wind generates from.
yeah, that things are bigger than me. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Seems like he's bored. I mean, it's like, like he just says,
Yeah.
Everything does this, it goes there. It's like he's bored. It's like there's nothing new under the sun. It's almost like he's looking for adventure or something.
Yeah. Well,
Like he's looking for
yes.
something to be excited about.
Yes, that's it. He's looking for something to be excited about. I would say he's looking for purpose in life. And the way you said it, he's bored, is great, because Solomon has had everything a man could want. He's had riches from all over the world. He's had power. He's got all these wives. He's got everything that man chases after. And yet he gets to the end and he says, I'm bored. I don't have anything that's giving me excitement anymore. We could take that other directions on, overindulgence and what that does to a man's spirit and soul. But he's looking for purpose. And what keeps coming to my mind is this idol track as we read through Ecclesiastes. All right, quiz time. What's idolatry?
Putting something in God's place.
Yes? How do I always define it, though?
Anything you put before God,
Uh-huh.
your ism.
Ism? Oh, yeah, Catherine knows.
Anything you gain identity from?
I was going to say, doesn't he spell it out?
Yep.
Yes.
So ism's the acronym.
Okay.
So it's identity,
Yep.
security,
Yep.
and me.
Yep.
I get the book started.
Now, it becomes an idol, like you guys said, when I find my identity, security, or meaning in something over and above God. And this is what he's talking about. He's found a lot of identity in being king, and now he's saying, oh, that's not enough. He's found a lot of security in all these treaties he's signed and this big army he has, and it's not giving him security in the face of death. He's found meaning and purpose in these wives and his wisdom and all of that, and now he's looking back and saying, not enough. So he's looking for something to fill this hole in his heart. A place of security in the face of death, a place of meaning, looking at some of the things in his life as not having a lasting effect. He's looking for a place of identity because he's kind of lost himself. What else do we notice in here? Yeah, he's bored. He's missing this big piece of his life. And he's the king of Israel. You'd think someone in that position would have significant purpose. But it goes to this fact that you can have, every person could potentially struggle with this, no matter how important their job or how big their family or whatever. You can get to the place where, what am I doing? What's this all worth if you've got it detached from the things that really matter? Herb.
This is not related to anything we're talking about. But
We love rabbit holes.
verse 6
Yes.
kind of hints at a spherical earth,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, Solomon had great wisdom.
Yeah, it did.
Was he able to observe things in the stars and the earth that would have said this is round? It's about the same time where other people around the world had observed the same things. And one of the interesting things about Solomon is he's existed over this reign of great trade with other countries, and all these pacts he's made. So maybe he's come across wise men from the East and scientists from Greece, and maybe he's got a little more insight into some of these things. Yeah, absolutely. What else do we notice in here?
That everything stays constant except man. Man comes and goes.
Yeah.
Everything else remains.
Yeah. The creation is. and man lives and dies. Yep. Yep. All right, what's kind of the tone of this opening chapter? Hopelessness, yep. Depression, frustration, fatigue maybe.
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that.
It's a show about nothing.
Show about nothing. Emptiness. Any other words you describe? Yeah, Barry.
I think I said earlier, just, having everything is still not enough.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's talk about this important word that we need to keep in mind. What does vanity mean in this context? How should we understand vanity here? It's going to be in every chapter from here on out.
What we value?
Okay. That's certainly part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
That word, I think it's a Hebrew word, a Greek word, hevel.
Yeah.
And it means literally like smoke or vapor.
Yep. So I've seen this spelled
Something
two
you can
ways.
see, but you can't grasp.
Yep. I've seen it spelled two ways. But hevel is how you'd pronounce it. And it literally means vapor or breath, or sometimes it's translated as enigma. Okay, so think vapor or breath. What's characteristic of vapor or man's breath?
It disappears.
It disappears. Yep.
Can't hold on to it.
Can't hold out, can't grab it. Yep. Yep. What else? Any other thoughts?
Disappears as quickly as it comes.
Disappears as quickly as it comes, yeah. So this is, think about when he says, money's vanity, all is vanity. It's something that's there and then it's gone. It's not lasting. And so this is how he's describing all these things that have no meaning apart from God. He's saying it's hevel. Hevel of hevels, vapor of vapors, breath of breath, enigma of enigmas. Okay, so things that are fleeting or endless loops of searching, something you can't grasp even though you're going to waste your time trying to. Kim?
I think it also means something that looks good,
Yep.
but it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the context we use it in our modern English is, outward looking, but it's empty inside. Yeah. Someone who's vain in that way. But there's a deeper part. What's that?
There's a song for that.
Probably. I bet you have one. Yeah. But there's kind of a deeper sense to it in the Hebrew than kind of in our English language, was kind of just say vanity is, being all about your appearance. And there's some sense of that, but it's more a grasping uselessness or frivolousness that gets into the Hebrew. So, and that's probably the way we should understand it as we read through this. Barry?
Vanity, the word vain means to probably think more highly of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
thing, which is what we read in the New Testament. It's not about humility.
Yeah. And they're related, certainly. Solomon, we get this biblical language, Solomon in all his splendor. And so you could be dressed up like Solomon, but what's it mean? Yeah, the lilies of the field are dressed better than Solomon in all his splendor. And it kind of gets back to, all right, do I want to be dressed by God or by earthly riches? Yep. All right, any questions on what hevel means? Well, we'll need to remind ourselves of this as we keep going. Maybe I'll keep it on the board.
Aaron?
Yeah.
Just an example maybe, which is very relevant at this point, President Carter.
Mm.
I mean, there was a man who practically accomplished as much as anybody in this country could accomplish in a position of power.
Sure.
But as soon as he left that, he just totally had a life service
Yeah.
for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be learned from President Carter. And, we could argue about his presidency and how effective he was in that role, but afterwards, he enjoyed some of the simple things. And there is some truth in Ecclesiastes about this. about what is truly enjoyable and worth. I think Jimmy Carter was teaching a Sunday school class at his church and into his mid-90s, which I think for a president, someone who's been the president, to do that rather than taking $1 million for speaking engagements, there's something to be said for that. Something to be said for that. I bet those $1 million speaking engagements don't give a lot of purpose. I bet he had a lot of purpose in his small Sunday school class he taught.
He's also a fly fisherman.
Oh, there we go. The ultimate purpose in life. Yeah. Where was I? Got me off track with fly fishing, Ken. Thank you, Lauren. What lesson is taught in the opening words? Nothing? Yeah, I like it.
That the world comes and goes.
The world comes and goes.
That we are but breath.
We're but breath. Yeah, we're fleeting. And this is kind of this where death comes in. I'm here for a second and then I'm gone. I think ultimately it's Solomon's looking back and he's frustrated and he's bored and he's a little bit empty. And it's this truth that a life apart from God, it's empty. You can have all the riches in the world, all the wealth, power, prominence, all the wisdom, all the knowledge. He's probably got more of these things than but a select few people on earth at this point. And he's looking at his life and he's saying, what am I doing? What am I doing? You know, you'd have to go many thousands of miles away from Solomon to get to a man more powerful than him at this time. And he's just saying, what's the point?
Is this all there is?
That's a great way to say it. Is this all there is? And the answer, and God's going to speak through him before the end, and it's no, this is not all there is. But he's certainly feeling that way. Yeah.
So he's actually reflecting on his earlier life when he had a relationship with God.
I think so, yeah. And I don't think his relationship with God is totally extinguished at this point. But I think he's reflecting on a lot of futile actions he has taken in his life. And some of the brokenness, he's still got a house full of wives that he probably should have never taken. And he's got sons and daughters by them that are infighting, and his kingdom's about to split because of the way he's lived his life. And he's looking at it all and saying, I've built a sandy foundation. And what's this all mean? Riches for the sake of riches and knowledge for the sake of knowledge. What's the purpose of all this? And so, yeah, it's kind of a come to Jesus, look yourself good and hard in the mirror kind of moment. Any other thoughts? All right, let's read one more section. Let's finish chapter 1. Someone read 12 through 18.
I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. And in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow.
All right, thank you, Mary. What do we notice? Yeah, Brian?
What are the three things that all people seek?
Money?
Sex and power.
Yep.
He had it all.
Yep.
He's a king, untold riches, all the women he could handle.
Yep.
And it meant nothing.
Yep.
And yet everybody still chases those things today.
He's commenting on, he doesn't have the word for it yet because Paul kind of explains this to us after Jesus, but he's commenting on sinful nature and what it seeks and what it doesn't give. Yeah. Mike?
It also seems like at this point, or during his life, he was someone that was worshipped, but he had nowhere to go.
Yeah. Yeah? Mm-hmm. A life without God. You see this sometimes in real big pastors who get so big they don't have pastors of their own. And what does Satan do with the heart of someone who has no one in authority over them? And he twists and turns it, is what happens, yeah. So, Solomon's maybe a little too big. And David also got into this point. But David, and you can see this in his writings, was much more interested through most of his life in seeking God's direction and counsel. And Solomon got a little lost in not doing that. And maybe because he asked for that wisdom and he thought he didn't need it. What else do we notice? Lauren.
Okay, quick rabbit hole. But verse 18, for he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Do you know, because in Genesis we sometimes call it the tree of knowledge versus the tree of good and evil.
Yes.
And if those are similar knowledge.
Well, I think it was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, if the word's the same.
Yeah, because that's a very interesting thing, that knowledge brings sorrow. We've seen that time and time again in the very beginning. That's the fall.
Yeah. I was thinking of a different place, but I love that you brought that up. This goes right back to creation, where God protects his people from knowledge of certain things. And here Solomon has, and look at the verse before, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceived that this is striving after wind. And so he's really coming to grips with, wow, what a situation we've got ourselves in this pursuit after knowing all and being like God, and it's painful. Yeah.
Like it's a mixed blessing? Like having the wisdom was a mixed blessing?
Mm-hmm. He's certainly saying in here that this wisdom was not valuable. At least, and this is where you always got to caveat everything in here, at least apart from God. It was not valuable to me. It did not do any good in my life, yeah. All right, let's answer a few questions, then we'll come back to some of these. What does Solomon speak of as unhappy business? That's verse 13. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. What do you think he's talking about there?
Isn't it the search for wisdom?
Yeah, the search for wisdom is one way to look at that.
Or the quest to be wise above all?
Yeah. So in the context of him saying it right after saying, I have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I have applied my heart to seek, and I've toiled, you kind of get the sense this is the affairs of man and politics. Is this unhappy business that he's been tasked with. The duty of kings has been an unhappy business to him.
Heavy is head that wears a crown. Right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. What does Solomon say here about riches?
Striving after wind?
Mm-hmm. I have seen everything that is under the sun, and behold, it is vanity and a striving after wind, fleeting and unsatisfying. He's probably seen more than any man in Israel's history. More different cultures, more riches, more science maybe, and he's just saying vanity of vanities. What does he have to say about wisdom? This thing he asked for, that he asked God of, and that we still remember him for, being a very wise man. We quote his Proverbs. You'd be amazed if we just kind of looked at all the common sayings we use today that come out of Proverbs. He informed our very language. And yet, he's looking at wisdom as what?
Striving after the wind.
Striving after the wind. Yeah. God used his wisdom to inform millions of people after his death. But Solomon, in this moment, can't see the value in it because he's been separated from God. Yeah. And it again gets this truth that wisdom for the sake of wisdom means nothing. You could follow every proverb to a T, and if you don't have a relationship with God and you're not doing it for him and you're not informed by him and you're not finding identity, security, and meaning in him primarily, your life's going to end the same way as everyone else's, or someone who knew nothing about God and did everything wrong. You're going to die.
He refers to it as a vexation. So almost, again, a blessing and a curse, that he's vexed by this
Yeah.
magnitude of wisdom.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I don't know if you guys could hear Gabby. She said, is this a warning about overdoing intellectualism and try, what was the second part you said?
Rather than like just trusting and following God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 You know, where we try and understand everything, and until I understand everything, I'm not buying it, God. You know, and yeah, absolutely. It's a warning of trying to put yourself on the same level as God, which, again, go back to the garden. You know, they wanted to be like, Satan wasn't lying to them when he said, eat of this fruit and you will be like God and you will know good and evil. There was a little truth in there. They were going to know some things and be aware of some things and have knowledge of some things that they didn't. What they didn't understand was that God was keeping them from those things for a reason. He was protecting them. Much like a parent protects a child from the unhappy things of life. Okay. Let's look more at verse 18. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Does this make you think of any gospel lesson from Jesus? You got it, Barry?
Matthew 6:19-21, which says, do not store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. Store up treasures in heaven where they can't destroy.
Okay, that wasn't the one I was thinking of, but it works.
Nice try, though.
You know, treasures in heaven, which is relational with God, rather than all the splendor of the earth. Absolutely. I was going a little different
I was
direction.
going to say, seek God first.
Seek God first, and all these things will be added to you too. Yeah. Okay, to much who much is given, much is required. That's another good one. You guys are going all kinds of. I love this. This is great. You're still not going where I was going. It doesn't mean you're wrong.
It's easier to head in through a camel vein or an eye through than it is heaven.
That's not where I was going either. We could make that work too. Perry, what do you got?
I was going to say the one that says, lean not on your own understanding.
Well, that's Proverbs. So that's Solomon's words. But yeah. What's that? All right, you want the answer?
They're all right.
They're all right. Yeah, this is just where it took me.
Which one's going to be on the test?
Right.
Well, you guys got to quiet down, okay? What this made me think of is when Jesus talks about the faith of children. You cannot enter heaven unless you have the faith of children. And it strikes me. I think we talked about this in some study in the past. We talked about, I think it was man and woman. We were talking about man and woman and how God designed them. And we were talking about the things that God gave mankind to do at the beginning. And it was, I'm trying to remember this right. It was be fruitful and multiply. It was care for creation. And it was don't eat of the tree. And don't eat of the tree, how did I say this? But anyway, it was every time they walked by that tree and didn't eat of it, it was an act of worship. Okay, remembering who they were and who God was. Remembering that he was their father and they were, what's Dave got going on back here? Hat's lighting up. He's just trying to distract us. Does that mean it's time? Is that what it means? Yeah.
It's an escape for a rabbit hole.
Do that next week during Pastor Kevin's sermon. Anyway, and Luther wrote about this. And he said every time they walked by the tree and did not eat of it, it was it was an act of worship. And then Bonhoeffer said this. He said, to be limited is a gift. To be limited is a gift. And what he was getting at, and I remember this is kind of where we went in this discussion, was the gift of childhood. I think every person who's ever lived, and maybe this isn't true if childhood was broken through something, but for the vast majority of human beings, we crave that feeling of childhood. We look back on it with rose-colored glasses. And as we were children, what did we want? We wanted to be adults, yeah. We wanted to be like the adults, and now we got there and we're like, what was I thinking? I should have been soaking it up. When what should we have been soaking up?
Innocence of childhood.
The carefreeness, the freedom, the sun, yeah. Sleep. That someone else was taking care of all the important matters. I wasn't vexed with them. Someone else was worrying about it, and you look back and your parents were working really hard and they had a lot of problems, but life was peaceful, life was okay. Why? Because you trusted the people taking care of you.
Yeah, and you weren't even aware of those things.
Exactly. You were not aware of all the good and evil. And yes, as we have more responsibility, more is required of us. But this is how God talks about the relationship between him and mankind. That he wants us in a childlike state, not being anxious about everything, not worrying about everything, but just trusting him. Saying, he's God, he knows what he's doing, I'll be okay. And yes, sin gets in the way of that, and we often fail to have this childlike mentality. But this is what I was thinking of as I read this. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases in sorrow. That there's this calling from God to be a little simple-minded when you think about how you're going to trust him. Because if we try and navigate everything on our own and outsmart the world, that's a vexing process. And there's this gift of being childlike that is broken by sin, that was broken by that first bite of the apple or pomegranate or whatever it was. Now the gospel is you're going to get it back. Okay, you'll get that childlikeness back in heaven, where everything is taken care of. But this is kind of the battle we struggle with among mankind and with sinful nature is I now have access to things that I asked for, but I didn't really want, and I didn't know I didn't want them. Thoughts or questions? Barry?
Just observation I was thinking about, maybe you remember Steve Jobs, who founded Apple Computer.
Yeah.
He died of cancer in 2011, and when he was dying, he was kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Wealth just isn't where it's at.
Yeah. Steve Jobs was singing a very Ecclesiastes song at the end of his life. And as successful as anyone. A purposeful life looking from the outside in, but he gets to the end and he's like, what's it all worth? What was I doing? Yep. Herb.
Well, one observation for me is that Solomon was dying, and he probably kind of saw the rest of the world dying, kind of like this second law of thermodynamics, that everything is winding down.
Yeah.
People around him, other things, maybe the world in general.
Yeah.
Probably that could be maybe part of the suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is, and we'll see this in the next chapter. He's vexed because he's built all this, and now the person who comes after me has to care for it. And he knows it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And part of that's because maybe he got things misordered, and he probably should have been focused on his sons more than his kingdom, so they could take care of his kingdom. But he built the kingdom and didn't build his sons, and it's going to fall apart.
His
Yeah.
house wasn't in order.
Yep. And it's all this whole priority thing. And it all starts with God coming first and informing the rest of my life rather than... Yeah. Good. Any other final thoughts here? All right. 2 questions. What's God teaching in this chapter?
Put him first.
Put him first. And if you don't, you're going to find some frustration.
You'll be vexed.
Vexed, I like it.
Oh, I would, yeah.
Yep. Empty. Where's Jesus in this chapter? Where do you see Jesus in it? He's what fills the emptiness. Absolutely. Absolutely. He's the one who allows us to be little children again. Any other thoughts on where Jesus is? This would be an interesting, I always like the where is Jesus in this question more when it's not as obvious. So we'll keep going. Lots of good stuff coming in Ecclesiastes. Some of it has a somber tone like this, but there is much for us to really think about on God's wisdom for our lives. So prayer requests.